How lucky are we to have Mike Mayock join us now? Of course, longtime draft analyst and former GM of the Raiders. Mike, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. How you all doing?
We're just a couple days before the draft. This is about as good as it gets, right?
We'll find out.
All right, so let's put you in John Schneider's shoes for a moment. First of all, congratulations. You've just won the Super Bowl. Nice job. Everyone's talking about how great a job you're doing. Unfortunately, the reality is that means you've got pick number 32 and you only have 4 picks. What are you doing on Thursday night?
Well, first of all, I'm happy you brought up John Schneider, and I'm happy people are appreciating him because that doesn't happen a lot in the NFL with general managers. And to have this is his 16th year, I think, coming up. He's one of the best and has been for years. So you're sitting at the end of the first, second, and third rounds, and you don't have a pick after that until the 6th round. So obviously when you win a Super Bowl, you lose players. They want to go get paid. And Seattle lost some players, starting with the running back, Walker. On defense, they lost Maffei and Reek Woolen to Philly and Kobe Bryant. So there's some holes there. I thought John did a pretty good job trying to backfill. But obviously running back is a big hole. Depends how much you value it. But with Charbonnet's situation, everybody in the world knows that that John's got to augment that position. So, I think you start there. And you're sitting there at 32, and I kind of laughed when I saw that John talked about trading down so openly. I'm kind of wondering whether or not he's trying to set the table for taking Price at 32, which wouldn't surprise me at all. But the problem is when you match needs up with the depth of the draft, especially when you're drafting at the back end of each round, Jadarian Price probably will be there at 32. I don't know how much beyond that he'll be there. He'll be the second running back off the board. And then the running back group is not as good as it usually is, especially on the first 2 days of the draft. After Price, I think there's another drop-off. And typically the running back draft averages 5.4 running backs taken in the first 3 rounds over the last 5 years. And I have trouble getting the 5 running backs that would have a first, second, or third round grade. So it's Love, it's Jadarian Price, Mike Washington from Arkansas, Emmett Johnson from Nebraska, Nick Singleton from Penn State. And those last 2 might typically be more like 4th round picks. So the pickings aren't great at running back this year, even though you can still get a solid one. That's point number one. I think their needed edge rusher matches up with the depth of the draft. I think you can get a quality edge guy at 64, maybe even 96. And if you're looking for an interior offensive lineman, I think the end of that second round for a guard would I think you find a real good quality guard at 64. So we can talk about all the individual needs, et cetera, but I think off the top, you could throw corner in there also, and there's a pretty deep group of corners.
You know what I want to talk about with you? Because you've lived this. You've done it. You were there as a general manager for a number of years on a Tuesday, 2 days before the draft. Take me back to the life experience. I'll get to the war room with maybe my next question, but take me back, Mike, to your real life experience there with John, with the Raiders, John Gruden in this case. And what was the Tuesday like 48 hours before draft day?
You were pretty much trying to make sure that you've already gotten rid of chasing all the ghosts that are out there. And trust me, the ghosts come out in the last couple of weeks. Guys that really you never heard of that all of a sudden ran 4.24 somewhere, and you're panicked because you don't have where's he? Where's he from? I don't even never heard of him. So you need to get rid of all the ghosts that you've been chasing, and really what most of the guys are doing are trying to get a little bit of quiet time. There's a lot of phone calls between GMs right now, and that's for a couple reasons. One, traditionally there is anyway. Like, if I need to move up, are you open? If so, what's the cost going to be? By the way, I'm open to moving down all 3 rounds. Just be aware of that. So there's a lot of that conversation, and I think with the first round going from 10 minutes to 8, there'll probably be even more of that, just trying to get more finite with what you have or you don't have. And I think all GMs have their own kind of idiosyncrasies as we get closer to the draft. And I talked to one guy this morning, the GM. He said, Mike, I just closed the door. I told everybody I don't want anybody in here unless there's an emergency, and I'm going to scrape through a bunch of the third-day guys myself that I haven't had enough of a chance to see. So I think everybody, Brock, kind of figures out their own thing, but I think most of us, when you got to about this point, the hay's in the barn, your board is set, and you're just kind of trying to get some quiet time to think through all the things that are coming up over the next few days.
You know, one thing I think Mike Mayock here with us, I've always appreciated and really grown to appreciate about John Schneider is how locked into their process they are. And he'll go on, and he's on every Thursday with our afternoon show with Bob and Dave. It's awesome. And he kind of is very clear about that. Like, here's the process, and here's, where we deal with the medical. And then, all our scouts are in. And then this last weekend was the time with all of our coaches. And then today, he and Mike will put the final game plan together. Mike Macdonald, like, this is it. And the hay will truly be in the barn Tuesday. How important do you think that process is, and how refined has it gotten over a decade and a half now in that position?
I think the best teams and the best general managers, which therefore means if they've been there a while, they've been a pretty damn good team. I think they stick to their process. And can they upgrade it? Can they fine-tune it? Can they bring analytics more and more into it? Absolutely. But there has to be a finite process, and you have to stick to it. And the good teams are consistent throughout that process. And I think the second point lurking there that you just said that I love is the connection between your GM and your head coach. And that's critical. I mean, if you want a smooth draft process, now remember, the hay's pretty much in the barn, and you got a board that everybody's agreed to, the coaches, the scouts, everybody. And now it's important that the head coach and the GM have the confidence in that board to see it through. Will there be some questions throughout draft week? 100%. And do you have to make some on-the-clock decisions where you're going to trade up or back, or you have an opportunity to do this? That's fine. Those are all things that, especially John has been doing it for 16 years. I mean, John's great at that. But you have to, in this case in Seattle, because John makes those calls, that the head coach has to implicitly trust him and know that John's not going to give him a guy that the coaching staff doesn't want. And whoever you take at 32 or 64 or 96, at that point, that guy's a Seahawk, and we walk together forever. And that's got to be the philosophy.
Talking to Mike Mayock here just 2 days before the draft. All right, let's talk about some of the options then that will be available in those spots. You mentioned running back, edge, and cornerback. We've certainly talked about all three positions. Let's start with running back. Jadarian Price, worth the number 32 pick?
I like Jadarian Price, okay? I don't love him in the first round. But what's the difference between 32 and 40 at a certain point? He's the next best running back option, in my opinion. Now, John and his guys might be sitting there and going, you know what? We don't love him at 1. We would much rather get, pick a name. We'd much rather get Mike Washington at 96 than we would Jadarian Price at 32. So there's a value piece that has to come into this equation, and then it's got to be compared against what's available and who's the highest guy on your board truly. Forget needs for a second. Say you've got the Georgia Tech interior offensive lineman is the number 28 guy on your board, and his name's Rutledge, by the way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What if he's at 28 and Price is at 40? And do you sit there and you go, wow, this kid is a really good player. And let me clear up one other misconception. And John talks about trading down, and all the fans think that's really easy. And it's not. And he may have some opportunities, especially because there's kind of a quarterback issue dangling out there. So there could be an opportunity to move down, and 32 historically is potentially a good spot. But there are a lot of times where you can't. You just flat out can't move. So, and you got to make a decision. So I guess my point is yeah, you're going to be looking at price, and that's the easy question for the fans. But you're also going to be comparing him to the edge guys available at 32. You know, how much do you like him versus, say, T.J. Parker, Cassius Howell, and Keldrick Falk, any one of which could be there? You know, how does that compare? How does that compare against the corner class? You know, what about the Hood kid from Tennessee? I'll tell you a kid I like who might be there is Johnson from San Diego State, the corner. Clean, really good player. I mean, so again, it's not just looking at a running back in space. It's finite. Just what's he? What in a vacuum? It's comparing him to everybody else and making the decision based on that.
You brought up the Chris Johnson kid, the cornerback. Is he a Seahawk? Yeah. Does he feel like a Seahawk kind of player to you?
Yeah, he does. And he'll tackle. You know, and Seahawks appreciate physicality. They appreciate guys flying to the ball. They appreciate good human beings that care. All of those things are a match for him. He can play press or off. I like the kid a lot, and I do think he'd be a good fit.
My memory was correct. I wasn't going to look it up because I do remember the last time you were on bragging about your baseball and football career back in the day at Boston College.
Yeah,
you were the multi-sport before there ever was. I'm curious, Mike, all these years later, I know as a player, I remember, you know, some of these challenging games that I had much more vividly than the good ones even. I'm curious from your years in the war room and running that. Do those memories of like, I wish I could go back with that one, do they hang on with you as much as your memories did as a player?
As much as wishing you could make a different pick?
Yeah.
A different decision? Yeah, of course. Brock, what I would tell you is that, and you know it as a former player, there's absolutely nothing like being in the locker room on game day, except coming back to that locker room with a win. And that's a feeling that people can't understand unless they've been through it. And I didn't have that feel for a lot of years till I took the Raider job. And, you know, so that was a long time in between locker rooms for me. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing. And it's the closest feel to being a player. So you could imagine, especially when, you know, you're making these decisions, some of them pan out, some of them don't. I would tell you right now, like I still wake up at night with the number 4 overall pick and taking Cleve Farrell in my first year as a GM. And I was looking for a solid player, and he's a pretty good player. He's still in the league. But at the end of the day, he certainly shouldn't have been a top 10 pick. And I still feel pain over that. It's somewhat mitigated by taking Max Crosby in the same draft in the 4th round. Yep. But we took with the Raiders when I was there. We took just as much pride with the late round guys and the free agents. We made some good calls there, and I'm just as proud of those. But in all honesty, Brock, just like my playing days, I mean, I still remember throwing an interception against Malvern Prep for the league championship my senior year in high school. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, that haunts me. That haunts me. I was 16 years old. It haunts me. And it's just like that. It's the same thing with draft picks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have that same feeling. 2-point conversion, Sumner High School. Just put it on him. Just don't throw it. Just don't throw it at his shins to a fullback. Put it on him.
See, that's the nice thing. I don't have any regrets. I don't have any memories like that. My sporting career was perfect.
You're clean, Salty.
Yeah, I'm clean. Yeah,
totally clean.
Going to that Boston College football camp we went to play Razzle Dazzle or something. All right, Mike. 6 teams this year don't have a first-round pick. How many of them do you think will want one?
Well, they'd all want one, but they're probably not willing to give the price up to get one. I would say, you know, I don't see Indy moving up. I don't see Cincinnati's moving up. Jacksonville's a little bit of a wild card because that GM showed some fur last year with his. I mean, James traded up to get that cornerback wide receiver, Hunter, you know, moving from, 5 to 2, I think. Mm-hmm. And for a first-time GM to do that in his first draft with his first pick, I was like, wow, that takes some fur. So who knows what's going to happen there. You know, and I don't think Atlanta's really has a whole lot of firepower to move. Green Bay. The thing is, when you talk about moving up, it's more about a position of need that has a high value, i.e. quarterback. That's where we see most of those things happening. And the other way it works is that when you see on your board a drop-off, and you know that you don't have a pick in the second round that's going to get a guy at that position, then sometimes you're like, I got to go get that guy. And that happens a lot at the beginning of the second round and the beginning of the fourth round when guys you can't get a guy in the first round, and people want to move up to the top of the second round, day 2, and in the top of the fourth round, day 3. But I don't see it's all about the quarterback. It's does anybody want the Alabama kid? And everybody's talking about Arizona.
Mm-hmm. Well, we watched Seahawks do that with Nicky Manwari last year to come up in the second round and get him. And, man, did that pay some massive dividends. Last couple things here for you, Mike. How do you explain, we started the segment or this hour with explaining to a fifth grader the platoon situation in baseball, righty to a lefty. How do you most simply explain best player available versus need, and how you wash that out in the process and ultimately on draft day?
Yeah, that's someday over a beer we'll talk that one over, Brock. But at the end, here's what it is. I think the best team, the most consistent teams in the league, take the best athlete available with a drop of common sense thrown in there. For instance, if you need a guard and you got a 65 on him, and you got a corner at 65, and you're looking at same exact grade across your board, and you're up next, and you're sitting there and you're going, okay, I need a guard. But that corner is a better position, more important position, and maybe we need to take him. And that's the conversation. That's the real conversation. So it's just a common sense thing. If you got a guy with a slightly higher grade and there's a guy just below him in a position of need, you probably take the position of need. You're trying to help your team now. However, the more times you reach, and this is the argument against the specific position, the more times you reach for a player over time, it lessens the talent level on your ball club.
Yeah, which is kind of what I've heard from different GMs and those are doing it. So then very specifically, John Schneider the other day said, we are a team that drafts for our board. We do our board. Yep. We don't draft for the rest of the league or how guys are going to. How many other teams, I guess that struck me as like, well, doesn't everybody have their own board and they only draft for their team and their board? Or do other organizations and teams try to draft to what others are doing?
Now, what it is you draft to your board, but when you have a good feel for league value, it can help you move up and down boards and make trades. So when I was with the NFL Network years ago and had a vast array of friends around the league, GM, scouts, coaches, they wanted to see my league value board before the draft because somebody that they might have a safety with a third round grade where my league value was sixth round. So maybe they can move back a round or two before they get them. So I think league value, the recognition of what a guy's worth league wide versus you might, just because of scheme or who your coach is or whatever, you might have a great feel for a certain kid and you might have a higher grade on him or a lower grade. It's really important to know what league value is so you can move up and get them or trade back. It's really a good tool to have.
Interesting.
Last thing for me, and it's something I always wonder about, is how hard is it to get into next year's first round in general? I know this year maybe it'll be a little harder because next year's draft looks a whole lot better than this one, but it always seems to be such an advantage to have a couple of picks in a draft heading into it in the first round. Right. And yet I don't see that many teams trading to get next year's. I mean, how hard is it to trade a second-round pick for next year's first if they're supposed to have equivalent value?
Right. I think there's an inherent feeling amongst GMs that if you have to wait to next year, you'd much rather have a player in your building this year. A, because he might play for you and help your team this year, but more importantly, given the development in your weight room, your nutrition people, your practice facility. Next year, year two, he knows what you're doing, and he should be a contributor. So typically, you'd rather get a guy this year. Now, if you get an opportunity where a team doesn't have a lot of draft value this year and is willing to overpay next year, that's a different conversation. And again, it comes down to kind of common sense and where you are as a team.
Mr. Mayock, always appreciate it, man. Thank you, too, on very late notice to jump aboard with us this morning. It's just awesome. I still quote you. You said to us either last year or the year before about alignment, and that, very few teams have the kind of alignment that we see in Seattle, and so many people strive for it. And, man, if we watch that come to life, like 4 Super Bowls in 20 years, obviously winning one last year, kind of out of nowhere. Yep. That one sticks with me, and we always appreciate all your wisdom and experience, man. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. I hope you have a great day and a great draft.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't appreciate this text that came in, Brock, that says, no regrets, Salk? There must have been a time you got the wrong herbal tea at the post-game tea. That's got to be a huge regret. See, that seems very unfair. That's very, very unfair that somebody would go there.
I like that.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyway,
appreciate it. Thanks, Mike. There you go. Mike Mayock.